You must have some questions around that Exodus narrative that you read about recently. Do you ever wonder why is it that we needed permission from Pharaoh to leave Egypt? Why didn't God just zap him, and we can all just leave on magic carpets? And why do there need to be 10 plagues?
Okay, yeah. Why does it need to be 10 plagues?
Great question. Well, basically, I'll give a little backstory to this that will then set up the answer, which is that at the very end of the book of Genesis, Joseph, who is actually, do you know, familiar with the story? Joseph becomes the savior of Egypt in a way, because he has this prophecy that there's going to be 7 years of plenty, then 7 years of famine. And so he says, let's save up, and then we'll be able to, become an economic powerhouse because we'll have all this saved grain. So he saves Egypt, he becomes second in command, and then Jacob, his father, later comes down, they were estranged for decades, comes down to Egypt and is reunited with Joseph. And Jacob has a very coveted and elevated role. He's the father of the savior of Egypt. So then what happens is at the end of the Genesis story, Jacob dies. And just before he dies, he's on his deathbed, and he says to Joseph, he says, please make sure that you bury me back in the land of Canaan, which would then become the land of Israel, which was Jacob's second name. He was called Israel. So he'd be buried alongside Abraham and Isaac, and also Adam and Eve, by the way, and 3 of the 4 mothers as well, Sarah, Rebecca, and Leah. Not Rachel. She's buried somewhere else, but that's another story. Anyway, so that's what he says to Joseph, please may I be buried back in the land of Canaan. And Joseph says, yeah, sure, no problem. And then Jacob says, swear to me that you'll bury me there. And he says, okay, I swear to you. And it's like, do you not trust your own son? Why do you need him to swear to it? Then later, when he dies, Joseph sends a message indirectly to Pharaoh requesting that he be able to go up and bury his father in the land of Canaan. And Pharaoh says, do as your father's requested. Why do you think that Jacob had a fear that Joseph might not honor his request to be buried in Canaan? Think about who Joseph was. Think about, therefore, who his father would be, what it would mean, all these things. Think about what Joseph did for the country, and think about what it would mean for him to leave the land of Egypt and go and take his father and have him buried. Remember, burial was a huge thing, especially in Egypt. Remember the mummies and everything. Death is hugely significant, and how people die and the way that they're treated in death. Can you think what that might mean and what Jacob's concern was?
That people would now really hate him.
Why?
Because they say he was the saviour of Egypt, but he's gone and buried his dad in some faraway place.
Exactly, yeah. Dual loyalty, right? Maybe he doesn't really, where does he really belong? And who is this really? And why doesn't he want to be buried in Egypt, which is the land that he was saved? All these things, right? So that's what Jacob was clearly concerned about. And so Joseph has to ultimately honor the fact that Jacob, his home, and his people belong in this land of Canaan, not in Egypt. They're temporary residents there at the moment. But it's very, very awkward. It's a very sticky situation because they see Joseph and his family as they're here to stay in Egypt. And it's very awkward, but he has to honor Jacob's request. So Pharaoh then says, go and do as your father says, but it's very cold kind of indirect communication with Joseph. But then what happens is, slowly, as Joseph and his brothers go along the way to honor his father, they take this coffin and take it towards Egypt, and they start on their journey. What we see is that Pharaoh's horses and chariots start joining the procession as they go up on their way to the land of Canaan to honor Jacob. So Pharaoh, in the end, ultimately recognizes that we should honor Joseph's father, honor his request, and let's do the right thing. Now, and that we also see that when they started going back to the land of Canaan, the inhabitants of Canaan were very amazed and impressed by this great procession. Why am I telling you all of this, and what's this got to do with the 10 plagues and the exodus from Egypt? A lot. Because we see the same thing happen, but with a very different outcome at the time of the Exodus. Because this time, the second time round, what happens? We see the same language when the Jewish people, as a whole, are also leaving Egypt on their way to the land of Canaan. The first time they go, it's to honor their father, Jacob. This time it's to go and honor and serve their Father in heaven, God, right? To go on that journey to their promised land. And we see the same language this time where the horses and chariots accompany the Israelites, but this time it's not to accompany them, escort them, to honor them, it's to go and attack them and bring them back as slaves, right? And then you have the whole splitting of the sea incident. And we see the same language in Psalms talking about how when the nations and the inhabitants of Canaan and others heard the great miracles that God performed, the splitting of the sea, etc., they were also amazed. We see very similar language. But what happened is, the first time round, the Egyptians honor Jacob. They honor the children of Israel and escort them on their journey to the land of Israel, his rightful place. The second time round, they don't do that. Similar language. Ultimately, the Jewish people are able to do what they need to do, and the Egyptians do escort them, but it's through kicking and screaming. So what this is telling us is that the Exodus didn't need to unfold the way it did, with the Egyptians being punished, facing all this terrible difficulty and punishment. What could have happened was Pharaoh could have repented, recognized the truth, recognized the mistakes of his ways, and escorted the Israelites on their destined journey to go to the promised land to fulfill their divine mission. It could have been just like the first template. So Genesis was almost setting the template. And so why was it that God didn't just zap Pharaoh into submission, and why did he do all these 10 plagues? He wanted to see if Pharaoh could actually change his ways. He wasn't looking to punish them. He was looking to change Egypt, change Egyptian society, and let them acknowledge the errors of their ways and make amends and acknowledge the truth. But they didn't do that. So that's what was going on here. So what we can learn from this is that the Exodus is not just a story about the Jewish people. It's about God's relationship and desire for moral accountability and connection with every single human being, right? With all nations, and for every nation and every people to play their part in the story. And so when you understand it in that light, it suddenly just takes the whole story to a much deeper level. And so it's just as much about Pharaoh's free will and his own moral battles as it is about the Jewish people's.
Hi, thank you so much for watching. To watch another one, click here. To stay up to date with all our content, click here to subscribe. And if you're able to, you can help support JTV to grow and grow by clicking join below this video, where you can become a member and get perks including early access to videos and private live discussions with me. But most of all, you'll be partnering with us on our mission to change the world.